You never forget the words that break you. Even now, at 70 years old, with the wisdom and the wrinkles to prove it, I can still hear my son's voice, cold as a winter grave. You're a burden, Mother. You only deserve the scraps. That was 2 years ago. My 68th birthday. The day my only child, David, looked me straight in the eye through his phone screen and showed me a bank transfer confirmation. $100,000. Deposited directly into his mother-in-law's account. He made a point of zooming in on the zeros, a smug little smile playing on his lips, before he handed me a flimsy birthday card. Inside was a $10 gift card to a department store. Thought you could get yourself something presentable, he'd said, his gaze sweeping over my simple, well-worn blouse. I always believed the bond between a mother and her son was sacred, unbreakable. At 68, I learned it was a fantasy I'd been feeding myself my whole life. David was my only child, born when I was just 22. His father, God rest his soul, was a charming dreamer who left this world and a mountain of debt behind before David even took his first step. I was left alone with a baby and a hole in my heart. I became a civil servant, a reliable, unglamorous job with a pension. I saved every penny I could. While other women my age were buying new dresses or taking cruises, I was investing in David. Private school. Summer abroad programs. He met Cassandra, the daughter of a wealthy real estate developer, and was swept into a world of cocktail parties and country clubs. A world I was never invited to join. Cassandra was always polite. She'd smile with her perfect, pearly teeth, but her eyes were like chips of ice. You really should let me take you shopping, Eleanor, she'd say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. David meets such important people now. Image is everything. After the wedding, David's visits dwindled. Our weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then became hurried phone calls on holidays. When I had a bad fall and broke my wrist, he sent money for a taxi to the hospital. I've hired a nurse for you, Mom, he'd said over the phone. I can't cancel my consultations. The nurse never came. But the birthday, that was the turning point. They showed up unannounced, and for a foolish moment my old heart leapt. They'd remembered. Mother, we need to talk, David said, perched on the edge of my sofa as if its faded fabric might contaminate his expensive trousers. Cassandra stood by the window, scrolling through her phone. We're buying a new estate in the Oaks, he announced, not even a happy birthday to spare. 5 bedrooms, a home theater, a tennis court. It's a necessary investment for our social standing. That's wonderful, David, I said, my voice thick with a hope I should have known better than to feel. It is, Cassandra chimed in, not looking up from her screen. My mother, Beatrice, has been invaluable. She introduced us to the right people, the best architects. She understands how these things are done. Then David took out his phone. In fact, I just transferred a small token of our appreciation. He turned the screen to me. $100,000. For Beatrice. The number on the screen blurred. 100,000. It would have taken me nearly a decade to save that much. How generous. I managed to whisper, my throat tight. It's the least we could do, Cassandra said, finally looking at me. Mother understands social capital. Networking. Unlike someone who's been buried in government paperwork her whole life. And my son, my David, didn't defend me. He nodded. Beatrice has vision, Mom. She knows how to build a legacy. Then, as if it were an afterthought, he pulled an envelope from his pocket. For you. Happy birthday. He paused and his eyes met mine, cold and clear. It's for the scraps. The word hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Scraps. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside, the $10 gift card felt like a slap. I thought you could buy a new scarf, David added, his critical gaze on my neckline. Something to hide the wrinkles. It's embarrassing at public functions. I thanked him mechanically, my mind screaming. They left soon after, citing a charity gala they couldn't be late for. As the door clicked shut, I collapsed. The tears came then, hot and shameful. I cried for the little boy I'd raised, for the man he'd become, and for the woman I had allowed myself to be. A woman who made herself small so her son could feel big. That night, the mother who accepted everything died. And in her place, a stranger was born. A woman with nothing left to lose. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the $10 gift card on one side of the kitchen table, and a lifetime of sacrifice on the other. I replayed every memory. Every promotion I'd turned down because it required travel. Every relationship I'd let fade because David needed me. Every dream I packed away in a box labeled later. All for a son who saw me as an aging, outdated accessory. As the sun rose, painting my shabby apartment in a cruel, cheerful light, I made a decision. I opened my ancient laptop and logged into my bank's website. The screen loaded and the number stared back at me, a quiet, powerful secret I had kept for decades. $1,200,000. David had no idea. For years, I had downplayed my financial situation. I didn't want him to know just how much more I could give because he would have taken it. And I had learned early on that when people think you have money, they treat you differently. My salary as a senior civil servant had been more than comfortable, and my frugal habits had turned that comfort into a fortune. To David, I was just a retired bureaucrat, a category he clearly despised. He thought I was living on a meager pension, which is exactly what I wanted him to think. That morning, with my eyes still swollen and raw, I transferred a sizable sum to my checking account and scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor. It was time my money worked for me. In the weeks that followed, I became a new kind of student. I devoured books on investing, watched endless financial webinars, and learned the language of stocks and bonds. My mind, which had been lulled into the gentle rhythm of retirement, woke up with a vengeance. It was thrilling. David called 3 times. First, to see if I'd considered selling my apartment and moving to a retirement community for people of your social circle. Second, to ask me to co-sign a loan for a new state-of-the-art medical scanner for his practice. Third, to ask if I could house sit while he and Cassandra went to Aspen. That won't be possible, David, I said, my voice calm and steady for the first time in years. I have commitments. The first time I held Clara, the world narrowed to the warmth of her tiny body against mine. She had David's nose and a dusting of fine fair hair. But when she opened her eyes, they were mine, the same clear, thoughtful gray. It felt like a blessing, a thread of continuity weaving through the frayed tapestry of our family. We'd like to name her Eleanor if you'll allow it, David said, his voice hushed in the hospital room. We want her to have your strength. The request was a balm and a burden. It was the most profound apology he could have offered, yet it placed a weight on my heart. This child would carry my name. What legacy was I truly giving her? One of bitterness and revenge, or one of resilience and grace? I would be honored. I whispered, my throat tight. Cassandra, looking tired but radiant, smiled weakly from the bed. We want her to know where she comes from. The real story. In those early sleep-deprived weeks, I became a quiet fixture in their home. Not as a doormat, but as a pillar. When Clara was inconsolable at 2 a.m., it was my old lullaby, the one I'd sung to David, that finally soothed her. When Cassandra wept from exhaustion and doubt, it was my hand on her shoulder that steadied her. I was not trying to take over. I was simply being what I had always been, a mother. The difference now was that it was seen and it was valued. Beatrice's visits during this time were a study in contrast. She arrived with lavish, impractical gifts, a miniature designer dress, a solid silver rattle. She'd hold Clara awkwardly, as if she were a fragile piece of china, her conversation revolving around which elite preschools had the best networking potential. She needs to be positioned correctly from the start, Beatrice declared one afternoon, while I was contentedly folding a stack of soft cotton onesies. She needs to be loved and kept dry, I replied without looking up. The rest will follow. The silence from Beatrice was frosty. The old dynamics were shifting, and she was being left behind in the cold. The financial troubles Cassandra had alluded to soon became public knowledge. Beatrice's husband, Arthur, was forced to declare bankruptcy. The empire built on appearances was collapsing under the weight of its own debt. The story was splashed across the business section of the newspaper, a tale of leveraged assets and bad investments. David showed me the article, his expression unreadable. They're selling the penthouse. Everything. I felt a pang of sympathy for them, swiftly followed by a grim sense of irony. The very wealth they had valued above all else was now the source of their utter humiliation. Beatrice's visit stopped abruptly. When she finally reappeared weeks later, the change was startling. The designer clothes were replaced by off-the-rack equivalents. The flashy jewelry was gone. She looked smaller, diminished, and her eyes held a new raw vulnerability. She came to my door one rainy Tuesday afternoon. "Eleanor," she said, her voice stripped of its usual condescension. "Might I come in?" We sat in the same sunroom where she had once seethed with envy. She didn't touch the tea I offered. "I find myself in a difficult position," she began, her gaze fixed on her hands. "Arthur has taken a job, a managerial position, and we've moved to an apartment. I heard. I'm sorry, Beatrice. Truly." She looked up, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "I don't know how to do this, Eleanor. I don't know how to live without the performance." Her voice broke. "I was wondering, your financial advisor, and how you managed." The world had truly turned upside down. Beatrice, the queen of social climbing, was asking me, the humble civil servant, for lessons in survival. "I can give you his number," I said gently, "and I can tell you what I know. But it starts with understanding the difference between what you need and what you want to be seen having." It was the first of many difficult conversations. I became her unlikely guide into a world of budgets, simple pleasures, and financial reality. We were not friends, but we developed a strained mutual respect forged in the fires of her downfall. For Clara's first birthday, David and Cassandra insisted on hosting the party at my house. "We want it here," David said firmly. "Somewhere that feels real." We organized a simple, joyful affair. There were no hired clowns or extravagant themes. Just family, a few close friends, a homemade cake, and a blanket spread on the lawn for Clara to play on. Beatrice and Arthur arrived, looking uncomfortable in their new normality. Beatrice's gift was noticeably modest, a beautiful classic storybook. As she watched Clara gleefully smash cake into her own hair, oblivious to the cost of her outfit, a strange, soft smile touched Beatrice's lips. It was the first time I'd seen her look at her granddaughter without a calculating glint in her eye. Later, as the sun set and the guests departed, David found me clearing plates. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice thick. "For today. For everything. For not giving up on me when I deserved it." "Mothers don't give up," I replied, echoing my words from months before. "Even when they should." He pulled a small wrapped box from his pocket. "This is for you. A belated everything." Inside was a delicate platinum bracelet. It was elegant and understated. I turned it over. The inscription inside made my breath catch. "For my mother, who taught me the true value of things." "It didn't cost $100,000, he said, a painful self-awareness in his gaze. "No," I agreed, fastening it around my wrist. "It's worth infinitely more." As Clara grew into a toddling, chattering whirlwind, I saw flashes of David in her. His curiosity, his stubborn streak. But I also saw the chance to do things differently. I never spoke ill of Beatrice to her, but I consciously nurtured a different set of values. We spent afternoons in the garden planting seeds and watching them grow, a lesson in patience and nurture that no designer toy could teach. David, too, was being reshaped by fatherhood. The driven, status-obsessed cardiologist was slowly being replaced by a man who would cancel a meeting to see his daughter take her first wobbly steps. One evening, he confessed, "I look at her, and I think about how you must have looked at me, and I feel sick." I threw away what I now realize is the most precious thing in the world for the approval of people who didn't matter. "You have it now," I said. "That's what counts." My relationship with Beatrice evolved into something resembling a cautious alliance. We were the two grandmothers, united by our love for a little girl named Clara. We would never be confidants, but we learned to share space without hostility. One day she admitted, "It's exhausting, you know, trying to keep up." There's a freedom in this simplicity I never expected. The first real test of our fragile new dynamic came when Clara, at 2 years old, developed a severe and mysterious fever. She was hospitalized for observation, and the fear in the air was palpable. David was a wreck, his medical knowledge useless in the face of his child's suffering. Cassandra clung to my hand, her composure shattered. And Beatrice, for all her newfound humility, reverted to type, demanding to speak to the chief of pediatrics and insisting on second, third, and fourth opinions. In the hushed, sterile quiet of the hospital room, the old tensions threatened to resurface. But then something shifted. David, instead of siding with Beatrice's bluster, looked at me. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked, his voice raw. I looked at the small, feverish child in the bed, at the monitors beeping steadily. "I think we trust these doctors. And I think we love her. That's all we can do right now." It was the right thing to say. The anxiety in the room lessened by a fraction. We settled into a grim, shared vigil. In that crisis, we weren't a fractured family of competing statuses. We were just a family, bound by a common fear and a common love. Clara recovered, her robust toddler constitution winning out. The crisis had passed, but its impact lingered. It had cemented our new roles. David saw me as a source of emotional strength, not just a financial secret. Cassandra saw me as a mother figure she could rely on. And even Beatrice seemed to finally understand that in the trenches of life, practicality and calm were more valuable than connections and noise. A few weeks after Clara came home, David and Cassandra sat me down for a talk. "We're selling the house in the Oaks," David announced. I was stunned. "Why? It's your dream home." "It was a dream," Cassandra corrected gently. "A dream we thought we were supposed to have. It's too big, too much upkeep, and it feels empty. It's full of things, but not full of us. We're looking for something smaller," David continued. "Closer to you, actually. A home with a big backyard for Clara. Not a tennis court for impressing clients." The decision felt like a final, definitive break from the people they had been trying to become. They were choosing substance over status just as I had. They bought a lovely, spacious bungalow just a 10-minute walk from my house. Its charm was in its warmth, not its square footage. I became a daily part of their lives, popping over for coffee, babysitting so they could have a date night, my presence a given, not an obligation. One afternoon, I was pushing Clara on the swing in her new backyard when David came home early from work. He stood watching us for a long time, a soft expression on his face. "You know," he said, coming to stand beside me, "for so long I was chasing this idea of a legacy. I thought it was about building a name, a reputation. But now I see it." He nodded toward Clara, her squeals of joy filling the air. "This is the legacy. The love we pass on. The values we teach. You were building it all along, and I was too blind to see it. It was the moment I had waited for my whole life. Not the money, not the house, but this, my son finally seeing me." Beatrice, now living in her modest apartment, began to find a strange sort of peace. Freed from the relentless pressure to perform, she started volunteering at the local library, reading to children. She discovered, to her own astonishment, that she enjoyed it. The children didn't care about her last name or her former address. They just loved the voices she made for the storybook characters. We started having monthly lunches, just the two of us. They were never warm, but they were cordial. We were two grandmothers who had traveled very different paths, only to arrive at the same destination. The understanding that what truly matters is often found in the simplest of things. "You know, Eleanor," she said to me once over soup and sandwiches, "I spent my life climbing a ladder. I was so focused on the rungs above me that I never realized the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall." It was the most profound thing I had ever heard her say. When Clara turned 5, she started kindergarten. It was a good public school with a diverse student body. David and Cassandra didn't even consider the elite private academies Beatrice would have recommended. On her first day, we all went to drop her off, David, Cassandra, Beatrice, and me. As we watched our brave little girl march into the classroom without a backward glance, Beatrice slipped her hand into mine. It was a brief, dry, awkward gesture, but it was real. We stood there, two women from different worlds, united by the love for a child, watching the future begin. The $10 gift card, the $100,000 transfer, they were ghosts from a past life. The humiliation had been the catalyst, but the love was the foundation we had built upon. Chapter 15. The wisdom of years at 76, my life is nothing like I imagined it would be. It is richer, fuller, and more deeply textured. I still manage my investments not out of necessity but because I enjoy it. I travel but modestly to places I've always wanted to see. I have a circle of friends, many of whom I met in my new community. But my greatest joy is my family. The fractured pieces have been mended with threads of gold, the Japanese art of kintsugi. The breaks are still visible, but they have become part of our beauty, a testament to what we survived. David is a different man, a better father and a better son. He still has his driven nature, but it's now channeled into his family and his genuine passion for medicine, not his social standing. For my 75th birthday, they threw me a surprise party. It wasn't in a fancy hall, but in my own backyard, filled with the people I truly loved. Clara, now 7, presented me with a drawing she had made. It was a picture of 4 stick figures under a rainbow. A small one for her, a tall one for her dad, a medium one for her mom, and one with silver scribbles for hair for me. She had written at the top, "My family." It hangs framed in my study, next to the financial charts and the deed to my house. It is my most treasured possession. David's speech that night was simple. "To my mother," he said, his glass raised, his eyes shining. "The strongest woman I know. You taught me about hard work, about sacrifice, and then, when I needed to learn it most, you taught me about forgiveness and the true meaning of wealth. You are our family's foundation." I still think about that birthday 2 years ago. The pain is a distant echo now, a shadow that no longer has the power to darken my days. It was the storm that cleared the air, the fire that refined the gold. Beatrice and I still have our lunches. Arthur, humbled by his fall from grace, has become a quieter, more thoughtful man. They are part of our extended family tapestry, their threads adding a different, but no. Clara's question about the gift card lingered with me. It was a reminder that while the past was healed, it was not forgotten. It existed just beneath the surface of our new happiness, a quiet lesson in the fragility of relationships. David, sensing my pensive mood, started visiting more frequently, often under the pretext of needing gardening advice, a hobby he'd recently taken up. We'd sit on the porch, him with his hands still bearing the faint, proud stains of soil, and talk about nothing and everything. It was in these quiet moments that I saw the boy I'd raised fully re-emerge, stripped of the armor of ambition. One such evening, he confessed something that shook me. "After you bought this house, after the shock wore off, I went to a therapist." He stared out at the twilight. I had to understand why I'd become that person. The man who could say those things to his own mother. He looked at me, his eyes clear and sad. "It was fear, Mom. A deep, rotting fear that I would be seen as the poor kid from the wrong side of town again. That everything I'd built would be taken away if I didn't fully assimilate into Cassandra's world. I was a coward." His honesty was a gift more precious than any bracelet. "It takes a brave man to admit he was a coward, David," I said, placing my hand over his. "You're building something real now. That's all that matters." Beatrice's transformation, while genuine, was not without its struggles. The loss of her social standing was a phantom limb, and she sometimes reflexively reached for it. She tried to organize a charity luncheon among her former circle, only to be met with polite, distant refusals. The women she had called friends had moved on to newer, shinier companions. She showed up at my door that afternoon, her composure shattered. "They acted as if they didn't know me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a humiliation I knew all too well. "As if the last 30 years meant nothing." "Perhaps they didn't," I said, not unkindly. "Perhaps they were just part of the performance too. I made us tea, the universal solvent for heartache. True connections aren't so easily broken, Beatrice. They're built on more than guest lists and golf club memberships. She nodded slowly, a tear finally escaping. I'm 70 years old, Eleanor, and I'm having to learn how to make real friends. It was a heartbreaking admission, but also a hopeful one. She was finally ready to learn. Clara, at 11, developed a keen interest in my adventure, as she called it. To her, my story of going from a modest apartment to a grand house was a fairy tale. For a school project on local heroes, she decided to interview me. She sat with a notepad, her expression serious, asking questions that cut to the heart of the matter. Nana, were you scared when you bought this big house all by yourself? Terrified, I admitted with a laugh. But sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing it anyway. And when Grandpa was mean to you, did you still love him? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I always loved the boy he was. I had to learn to love the man he was becoming. And sometimes that meant setting boundaries to protect the love I had for myself. She scribbled furiously. Later I read her project. The title was, My Nana, the Bravest Person I Know. She had drawn a picture of a lioness at the bottom. David told me her teacher had been so moved she'd asked to keep a copy. My legacy was being written not in bank statements, but in the heart of a child. Arthur, Beatrice's husband, had always been a shadowy figure, more present in his absence than his presence. The bankruptcy had broken him in a way that was different from Beatrice. Where she was learning to adapt, he had retreated into a shell of shame. One Saturday, he appeared at my garden gate, looking lost. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough with disuse. Beatrice said you're the one to talk to about things. I invited him in. He didn't want tea. He just wanted to walk in the garden. I built an empire on sand, he finally said, staring at a rose bush. I spent my life chasing a number, and now the number is 0. I don't know who I am without it. Then maybe it's time to find out, I replied. You're a grandfather. That's a pretty important title to hold. It was a small seed, but I saw it take root. He started showing up to Clara's school plays, sitting quietly in the back. He wasn't the boisterous, backslapping grandfather, but he was there. His presence was his apology, his penance, and his first step forward. David and Cassandra decided to use the equity from the sale of their mansion to start a small, non-profit clinic in an underserved part of the city. David would run it 2 days a week, offering pro bono cardiac consultations. It was a complete departure from his previous life, focused on prestige and profit. He was nervous, afraid his skills had grown rusty in the rarefied air of private practice, but the fire in his eyes was new and pure. This feels right, Mom, he told me. This feels like what I was meant to do with this degree. You worked so hard to pay for. The clinic's opening was a small, quiet affair. There was no ribbon cutting covered by the society pages. But when I saw my son, stethoscope around his neck, kneeling to speak gently to an elderly patient, my heart swelled with a pride I had never felt before. He was finally using his gifts to heal, not to climb. Beatrice, inspired by Arthur's tentative steps and my own garden, decided she needed a project. She rented a small plot in the community garden. It was a comical sight at first, Beatrice in her now faded designer gardening clogs, wrestling with a bag of potting soil. But she was determined. She came to me for advice, and I became her gardening mentor. We spent hours together in the sun, our hands in the earth, talking about compost and cuttings instead of social climbers and stock portfolios. The shared, simple goal of making things grow bridged the last of the distance between us. We weren't just grandmothers, we were fellow gardeners. When her first tomato ripened, a perfect red jewel, she brought it to me as if it were a diamond. We ate it sliced with a sprinkle of salt sitting on my porch. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. For my 80th birthday, the family threw me a party, but it was the gift from Clara that undid me. She had secretly been working on a scrapbook for months. It was not a collection of my financial successes or my beautiful home. It was a history of love. The first photo was a faded picture of me, young and tired, holding a baby David. Then came photos of his graduation, his wedding, all the moments I had been present for but felt invisible in. But then the pages changed. There were pictures of me holding a newborn Clara, of our gardening adventures, of the four of us on Christmas morning. The captions in her careful handwriting told the true story. Nana's first day in her new house. Nana teaching me to bake. Nana, the best storyteller. The final page was a recent photo of David and me. His arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing. Beneath it, Clara had written, "The year my dad found his way back to his hero." I wept without shame. This was my fortune. This was my masterpiece. The nonprofit clinic became a modest success, garnering local news attention for its community impact. David was interviewed, and to my astonishment, he spoke not of his own philanthropy, but of his mother. "She taught me that real wealth isn't what you keep, but what you give away," he said, looking straight into the camera. "She is the reason this clinic exists." The phone rang off the hook for days afterward. Old colleagues, distant relatives, even a few women from my old apartment building called to say they'd seen it. I was no longer just Eleanor, the mother who'd been wronged. I was Eleanor, the matriarch who had inspired a legacy of giving. The story had come full circle, transforming my private pain into a public lesson in redemption. Life in my 80s settled into a gentle golden rhythm. My body sometimes ached with the memories of its years, but my spirit had never been lighter. David and his family were my anchor, their lives intertwined with mine in a daily dance of shared meals, school runs, and quiet evenings. Arthur, in a surprising turn, became an avid birdwatcher. He'd set up a feeder outside my kitchen window and would often come over with his binoculars, pointing out a rare finch or a particularly bold cardinal. He and Beatrice had found a quiet, unpretentious happiness in their new life. They were no longer playing roles, they were simply living. One rainy afternoon, Clara, now a thoughtful teenager, was helping me organize my study. She found my old leather-bound ledger, the one where I had meticulously tracked every penny saved for David's future. "Nana, what is all this?" she asked, running her fingers over the columns of numbers. "That," I said, "is the story of how much I loved your father." She spent an hour poring over it, her brow furrowed. "You paid for all of this? And he still acted that way." The injustice of it burned in her young eyes. "He did," I said calmly. "But Clara, look at the last entry." I turned to the final page. It was blank. "The most important investments," I told her, "aren't the ones you write down. They're the ones you make with your time, your forgiveness, and your heart. The ledger of love doesn't have columns for debt and credit. It only has space for growth." She closed the book, understanding dawning on her face. The lesson was learned. A health scare at 83 brought a temporary shadow over our peace. A minor heart arrhythmia landed me in the hospital for a night. The response from my family was immediate and overwhelming. David barely left my side, his medical expertise now a source of comfort, not distance. Cassandra brought me homemade soup. Beatrice and Arthur took turns walking the halls with me. Clara drew a picture for the wall. Lying in that sterile bed, surrounded by the people I loved, I felt no fear. I had faced the storm of betrayal and survived. This was just a squall. I was not a burden. I was the center of their universe just as they were of mine. I am 85 now. The seasons have turned, and the harvest of my life is richer than I ever could have imagined. The $10 gift card is long gone, recycled into something useful, I hope. The memory of the hurt has faded, replaced by the vibrant, living reality of my family. Today we are all at my house. David and Arthur are arguing good-naturedly about the best way to prune the rose bushes. Cassandra and Beatrice are in the kitchen, laughing over a failed attempt at a new recipe. And Clara, my bright, beautiful Clara, now a young woman with a fierce and kind heart, sits with me on the porch. She is telling me about her plans to study social work, to help families who are struggling, just as we once did. "I want to help people find their way back to each other, Nana," she says, "like you did for us." I take her hand, my own now lined with the map of my years, and squeeze it. The circle is complete. The legacy is secure. It is not a legacy of wealth or property, but one of resilience, forgiveness, and the unbreakable, enduring power of love. The scraps I was once offered were the seeds of this beautiful, abundant life. And for that I am finally and completely grateful.